is then Buzzo, who is a media artist and artistic researcher based in Berlin and Amsterdam. He's currently the professor of interaction design at the Code University of Applied Sciences in Berlin. I think he has been recently appointed, if I'm not wrong. And he's the founder of the Creative Technologies Lab at the University of West England, Bristol, and also is also associated with the Hong Kong Design Institute and the IADE Institute in Lisbon and the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And today he's going to talk about his work, the human drawing, which is a piece that uses Markov chains to learn in a way from drawings, and then, as far as I understand, generate instructions again for humans to draw based on these learned probabilities. So, Dan, we are very happy to have you here. The word is yours.
Luke, and I know David is working very hard in the background, making all of the technology and the streaming and everything happening. I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity and for pushing ahead and making ARIGA happen. As I saw the call that you put out, which is many months ago now, and being involved with quite a few faces that I see here in the early discussions of, well, what's going on and what are we interested in and what are the diversities and what are the commonalities and what shall we do? And I was really impressed at the time with you quite clearly going, this is not going to happen overnight, but also this is a longer discussion and proposing these things and me foolishly saying, okay, I'll do one. So I'm really, really happy to see so many people again here to talk about our interests, our commonalities and our differences and ideas around art, generative design, working with systems. I'm really happy to show you a piece that I thought was kind of interesting. And I was really excited when I was starting to build it. And I thought it might be an interesting one to bring in some ideas that I was intrigued by. And I know lots of other artists and designers and thinkers have talked about, and see if it maybe provokes a discussion and starts us off in hopefully what will be a really interesting series of talks by the rest of you. So I'm going to get mine out of the way first and get on with it. What I wanted to do was actually dive straight in and do something together around drawing. And I built a little thing, which I'm going to talk through in more detail. But if you can reach out and find some paper and a pen of any description, I'm going to share my screen and hopefully you can hear the audio. And
take a piece of paper and a pen and draw.
And just follow what the machine says.
A line down. A circle. Then add a line left. And a line left. A line left. And a line left. Continue with a line up. A square. A squiggle. A squiggle. An arc up. A line down. Then a circle. Then add an arc left. Then a line left. An arc right. A square. Follow with an arc right. A squiggle. An arc down. an arc up, a line down, a circle. Continue with an arc up, a line right, an arc right, and a line up, a line right, a square, and an arc up, and stop there.
I'm gonna show you what I drew, and then I was hoping that everybody could show what they drew. That's really interesting. The orientation. Cool, thank you. Would you be up for doing one more, but a little bit faster? Okay, I'm going to take silence as consent, which probably would be bad, but there's a couple of people smiling like it's not a bad idea. So I'm going to fire up the GUI here, and I'm going to speed it up, reset it, and let me get it back on screen. Can everybody hear it okay? Awesome. Okay. So please take a piece of paper.
Take a piece of paper and a pen and draw. A line up, an arc down, then a line right, an arc right, a square, then an arc left, a line left, a line left, then draw a square, an arc right, a loop, followed by a line left, followed by an arc left, a line up, an arc down, then draw a line up, a line down, a circle, followed by an arc right, next a line right, then draw a line down, an arc down, a square, a line left, then an arc right, an arc down, continue with a square, next an arc left, a line up, and a line up, and stop there.
That's fab. That's really, really fab. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to quit the software now. That's basically what I built. And it came from, I carry a notebook with me everywhere, and I have done for a very long time. And I've got stacks of notebooks on my shelf going back to when I was a feckless teenager going to art school. And in most of the jackets that I carry, I have a little A5 notebook, and a lot of them are pointless lists and bits of diagrams and bits of drawings. And sometimes I get this feeling that I want to draw, but I don't quite know what I want to draw. Often I'm thinking about visual ideas or spatial ideas and drawing them. But sometimes I just like the movement of the pen on the paper and the noise and the gesture. And I've seen, I think it's Louise Bourgeois was talking about this, beginning to write a letter. And if she had something important to write, she would fill a whole page of paper in the kind of scrawly shapes of words that didn't actually have words, to get that nervousness out of her body and ready to write. And I saw some of the drawings, I think it was from her. Vera Molnar also made some beautiful pieces about analyzing a handwriting of trying to write letters to her mother, but not knowing what to say. And I would be doing these drawings and squiggles on airplanes and trains and whatever. And I was intrigued about the shapes that I was drawing because there was a language in there. And I thought, well, just as a technical exercise, I wonder if I could get my plotter, because I have a nice couple of 1980s pen plotters that make a fabulous noise and zoom around. Maybe I can build a Markov chain out of this, because I started seeing that there was a grammar, a language, a kind of syntactic structure, that squiggles were always separated and that boxes were delineated in certain ways. And there were more lines like this than lines like that. So I started analyzing a little bit, roughly, the basic sets of marks that I was using that I could recognize as being my marks that were non-figurative. And looking at the different kinds of marks, if I shared a screen, I came up with this, which was the basic elements of a simple Markov chain, which started out saying, well, okay, I can make lines, and there are 4 line types to go up, down, left, or right. And then there are 4 arc types to go arcing up, because I love this sort of gesture. A lot of the time when I'm writing, I'm just really enjoying the shapes, and I try and read it after, and I can't read my writing at all, but I really enjoy putting it on the page. And depending upon how I'm feeling, it'll change shape a little bit and speed, and legibility is not really a question with the way that I write, but I really like the sound that particularly these kinds of pens make. So I realized I was making these lines up, down, left, and right, and arcs up and down and to the left and the right. And there were these little sort of gestural punctuations in the movement of my hand around the page, which was circles and squares and loops and squiggles. And this is sort of how I could describe them for me. And then starting to analyze what I'd been drawing that was looking kind of like these things, that they would have a particular set of punctuations. And from that, I was able to produce Markov chains. Now, I'm guessing that most people are aware of or have used Markov chains, and they're very old, but it's just this link of probability to say, being here, what is the likelihood of going to these next set of steps? With a coin toss, it's A or B, and there's 50-50 wherever you go. If you're on heads, it's 50-50 whether you get heads again or tails. But with certain kinds of things, it was more likely that I would draw something next. So if I've drawn a squiggle, it's not very likely I would draw a squiggle again, but it's equally likely that I would draw something up, down, left, or right. So each of the columns down and columns across allowed me to start guessing, if I've drawn a squiggle, what's the chance that I would draw a squiggle again? 0.05. Each of these lines and columns adds up to 1 to give you a weighting probability percentage. But drawing a squiggle here, after having drawn a squiggle already, is half as likely, 0.05, as it is to draw a line up or down or left or right at 0.1 or 10%. But to draw any of these, a line up, down, left, or right, is actually 40% of the overall chance after a squiggle, whereas to draw another squiggle or a loop is only 5%. So I started playing with these simple matrices, and from thinking about it, was able to take this, and I show the spreadsheet here just because it made it very easy for me to alter the weightings to make sure each next probability added up to 100% of all the separate pieces. And I went into Open Frameworks, which is a C++ creative coding framework that I use a lot, but it would equally work well in pretty much any programming language. I just use it quite a lot. And incorporated a simple Markov chain. And from the spreadsheet, I just exported the data very simply. And if I screen share, the desktop. You should see yourselves for a moment. And this is my C++ project. And most of this is just associated with me building this on, I'm mostly working on Macintosh. And in the bin folder is the binaries that are built. And in the data folder, I've got a TrueType typeface that I'm just using to make things look a little nicer on screen. And then I have this text file, which is the transition matrix, which is just the output from my spreadsheet and my Markov chain add-on. Looks in here and says, if I'm at state 1, what's the likelihood of the next thing happening? And so I started working on this and playing with it and seeing that I could make it do drawings on screen of the kind that I was interested in. And working in open frameworks, I started to put this together. And I was intrigued that actually I was much more interested in the suggestions that the system might make than the system drawing something. So I got it to start giving me text output of what to draw next, of what it thought should be in the drawing. And I realized that I was having much more fun executing what the computer said than sending this out to a plotter and having it doing exactly the same thing every time. And there was something for me very strange that happened as I moved this and said, okay, well, let's make it give me a list of gestures as suggestions. And suddenly I realized I could become the plotter, the printer. And rather than this relationship, often with generative art, of I am the artist and I'm going to get a machine to execute my wishes and it will execute exactly what I want. And I've always been intrigued by this situation of when you work with smart tools or you work with complicated systems, at what point does the tool change in its nature and it starts to become a little bit of a collaboration? And there's a lot of people that are exploring this, from musical production tools through to co-designing with smart artifacts, and people talking about intelligent digital fabrication and a whole load of big thinking going on around it. But it's always been a question for me about what's the relationship of me working with a computer that's a very, very complex system, and is it different from working with a pen? And I think it is. There's something about the complexity in that we don't really talk about light switches as being interactive, but there's a level of complexity where the system is exhibiting complex behavior. And I think it becomes an interaction and partly a collaboration. And when I'm programming or working with computers, often I'm asking questions of the system and trying to navigate and almost not quite an illusion of mind, but there's something going on in there. And I was intrigued by this, having the system talking to me. So I went through, let me share the desktop, and started drawing out what these gestures that I described might be and how I could communicate them to somebody else, because I knew exactly what I meant by a squiggle. And just did some drawing and captured these simple things and put them into the machine. And depending upon what comes up from the Markov chain next, rolling these random sets of interlinked probability, it would pull me up an icon. And I like the idea of the voice having a machine really explicitly saying, okay, human, you're going to be my printer, you're going to be my plotter, I'm going to tell you what to do. Going through and I'm working on OS 10 quite a lot, and using the inbuilt system speech is really straightforward. So I just built lists of, if I can find this in lists of gestures. And have the machine run through and fire the name of the gesture in this interlinked list alongside showing an icon out at the author, and then built a range of conjunctions which are randomly added in to make the system actually sound less mechanical. And what I found is playing this, people would come around for supper and I go, hey, look what I've made. And we'd all sit around and do drawings. And it was a very, very odd situation because we started to recognize the differences between drawings in different sessions. And people would all hold their drawings up. And you could recognize they'd all come from a similar source. Different people would recognizably have different strategies about how they were implementing the instructions to the machine. Different sets of drawings from different sets of instructions had similarity between them. And I got stuck with this project at that point of going, I think this does what I want. It for me asks this question of what is the relationship between the person and the computer or the system? Whereas in a lot of work that I've done previously and I see other people engaging with, it's a designer or an artist or a researcher building a generative system and then tuning the system to get the outputs that we like. Whether we're talking about making fractal jazz and tuning out all the off notes, or having something draw and then speeding it up or slowing it down to get towards an aesthetic idea that we have, or quite a lot of artists, especially starting to work in sort of machine learning, working with neural networks and GANs and things like that, where they're choosing source material to have the machine analyze that or analyzing it, people doing audio work with Markov chains, etc., and having it produce the stuff. And I loved what was happening of seeing people automatically adjusting, where you go, okay, draw a line left, anticipating that there might be one more. And I noticed in the first set of drawings, which is this one, the machine actually said, draw a line left 4 times in a row, because randomness is lumpy and streaky. And the first one I'm drawing is quite large. And the next one I'm anticipating modifying my behavior to fit. So I'm sort of interpreting the instructions from the machine and trying to adjust, make it fit. Interesting, I saw somebody had drawn everything very evenly spaced in the upper right corner. I'm not sure who that was, but I'm like, wanted to take up the whole page and do these big gestural things because I love the way that the pen sounds on the paper, and seeing other people really interpreting it very evenly in a gridded fashion. But all the drawings look the same. And I got to this point of loving this. I don't know whether it's a great piece of work. And I've looked at challenges of how to exhibit this, and essentially putting a big screen in, a stack of paper, and wiring up the reset button to through a makey. So there's just a big red button. People walk in, slap the big red button. The computer still tells them to start drawing. And it becomes performative with the system, which I really like. And I don't know what my conclusion from it is, but I got to this point of going, who's in charge? And is it important that somebody's in charge? And I quite like that it is so different to the work that I do when I'm using a pen plotter or other outputs like that, where I'm clearly in charge. And in this place, the computer and I made something together based upon an idea that I gave the computer, but then it told me to do, and I interpreted what the computer wanted. So I don't know whose drawing this is. And that's kind of where I ended up, not really knowing whose drawing this is, but I didn't make it on my own. And the computer didn't make it on its own. So I had wanted to talk a whole load more and start talking about code and talking about Markov chains and all kinds of different things. But I think that's what I wanted to show you. And really see, I had a whole load, there's a whole slide set that I've built with a whole load of different things and quotes. And actually I changed my mind this morning and thought, no, I just want to draw with everyone, because that was what really excited me about this weirdness of going, I genuinely don't know whose drawing this is. But if everyone can hold up drawing number 1 that they did, in a weird way, these are all our drawings individually, but we didn't think of them. Kind of. So I don't know whether this collectively is computers' drawings. And there's a workshop that I have done with ICCC, and I'm going to do here at Code in Berlin. We have like an art week, and I'm going to run it with a couple of students. And it was an introduction to generative drawing, where I'd start off taking some of the things from people like Sol LeWitt and asking people to write simple rule sets. And they just write them down. And the other people in the group would perform those drawings based upon the description that somebody had made, to get into this discussion about generative drawing, and then talk about how we can translate them into loops and code and all of those implementation details. And I love that sort of, in this instance, the machine has become Sol LeWitt. And we are all Sol LeWitt students executing the drawings to Sol LeWitt, who will then take credit for them. Anyway, I'm kind of, that's what I wanted to say. I've got all the source code here, and I can talk about how I built it, and I can talk about the intentions, but I really wanted to ask you what you thought that I built and who did the drawings, and see if we can have a bit of a discussion rather than me just talking to camera all day. So I want to say thank you very much for being game for doing some drawing with me, because I love doing this stuff. And I don't know, genuinely, I don't know whose drawings they are. And I really enjoy that. So I want to say thank you very much. And I'm really happy to talk through anything that people might want to talk through. And if people would like, I'm really happy to walk through the code and why I built things the way that I did. And if you're interested, I will post the link for the source code right now, and you can go and fork it on GitHub. And if you've got suggestions for improvements or efficiencies or alterations or suggestions, I would be very, very happy to hear it. But you can go and get the source code from there in C++, works with open frameworks, and it would be super easy to port to a different language if people were interested in doing so.
Thank you, Dan. This was great. A lot of fun drawing these things. Maybe so if anyone wants to ask a question, you can just raise your hand. We're not that many, so you can raise your actual hand, or you can click the raise hand button if you prefer. Prefer that little motion of your finger. Maybe I can just start while people are making up their mind. And I was like, when I read the description, I was very intrigued with this idea of having the output be again sort of the human or a human agent in a way. And then I thought how to kind of transport that, what role that has in my own practice, which is sort of an immediate reaction I have. And of course, as a composer, I actually writing for relatively traditional ensembles, but using generative processes. I actually have that, or I mean, many composers have write for acoustic instruments, of course, have this type of situation where there's this interpretation at the end, and that some kind of generative process is then again phased and translated and realized, manifested materially in a way by humans again. And there's this process. And I also thought about that while drawing, like that it sort of has to pass through us, that algorithm somehow, and we are making all these little decisions. And then I was also thinking like, I had the same kind of thing. Okay, this line is going to be very long. I'm going to end up on the edge of the paper, or should I cross over? Because I have a book like this, so I had to make a decision whether I want to use that page as well, and so on. And there are all these decisions in there, like basically kind of decisions of an interpreter in a way. And then I thought, when you talked about how to display this or how to show this in some form of exhibition or performance, like if there isn't some kind of social aspect to it, like almost like a music ensemble where you have to see it interpreted by many people in order to sort of see your particular decisions also, because there's something about the identity of it which you only see if you have all these different interpretations of it. How that, maybe it's a kind of a group thing. Maybe you need a couple of people before it can be performed. Maybe it's not something that just, it's not just you turn on the computer, you draw it. You have to collect a group of people before you can do it. That's what was sort of my associations. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, it was very strange in that a lot of the other work that I do with generative systems, especially making generative visual systems or generative video or thinking about generative audio, they can be very solitary experiences for sort of ingesting the material that's coming out of a system. And I was intrigued by this because it's very delineated. There's a beginning and an end. And often generative systems, the nature is you switch them on and they'll just produce stuff forever. But this, as you say, filtering and softening makes me think about a lot of what we do with machines, in that machines are, particularly in the industrial design or in the commercial sense, a lot of stuff is just not very good. So we as humans change our environment to suit the machines. If you have a robot vacuum cleaner or you've ever seen one in use, you know how happy they are to run across the floor and find the first piece of carpet or the stray power cable that they can eat and then collapse and die in the corner going, I've ingested something I can't deal with. So we end up changing our houses to suit the vacuum cleaners. We end up changing our communication practices to suit the computer software. And in here, we're sort of altering our drawings to suit the fact that the computer doesn't care. It's issuing these bombastic instructions. But having tried this on my own, I know what's going on, and quite quickly it's sort of boring. But there is something exciting about drawing together. And I've seen people doing performance drawing events, which have nothing to do with generative art. But actually, I think they kind of do, in that they're dance event, almost dance events with pens, where people are doing mass drawing events. And there's something electric about that collaboration, like seeing musicians composing, improvising together. And I think that was what struck me somewhere in there. I'm sure somebody that has a much stronger philosophical bent and a psychological bent than me will give a greater insight. But it was that everybody drawing at the same time, silently with a similar intent, knowing that everyone's got a different interpretation, that does make it quite different, and that it's delineated. It becomes this odd, fun game, almost, with only the computer knows the rules. So, yeah, I don't know. I think it's just a performance thing. And having done it in a room with people, it's even more fun because you can put everyone's pieces of paper next to each other. Casper, you're going to ask a question.
Yeah, I think I don't have a philosophical insight into this, but I think that indeed what fascinates me is also the ambiguity of the symbols in a way. I mean, in a way they're very straightforward, but of course, I mean, a human interpreter could also make a piece of music out of these instructions, or could interpret it as a dance, for instance. I mean, it has also a very dancing kind of choreography. It could be a walk also or it can be many things. And I think what I like about putting something in the machine is that it somehow loses specificity, because it is indeed, there's no longer this intention behind it. I mean, if a composer would have, or a drawer would have made the order of the instructions and okay, this comes after that, this comes after that, this comes after that, but because we know it's a Markov chain which has no model of, or doesn't have a foresight except for one step, the symbol becomes very ambiguous in a way. And I think the ambiguity is what makes it so fun also to play it in a way, to play this game. Because then, I mean, I could also imagine a version where you're actually very disobedient and you're doing everything except the instruction that is there or something, or something like this. And so indeed, as a group, suddenly when you start to do this, I wonder what happens if you do it 100 times. I'm sure that it would also maybe it would die out in a way. You would get stuck somehow, or maybe you would find new ways of interpreting it in even a more fun way. But yeah, very interesting. I think it's very familiar also indeed in the context of music, where I've recently also been generating a lot of MIDI, and I realized that one of the attractions of MIDI is that it's kind of also very ambiguous. I mean, you can play it as notes, but you can also interpret it as percussion, or you can even have it as trigger something ongoing that it just turns on, starts and stops something. It's ambiguous, and its ambiguity is actually what makes it fun in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I think, but your point particularly about that generation of these odd events, that as a sort of the human executor, you can go, violins doesn't work, square wave, that works, percussion, actually, no, detune it, filter it, some reverb, that we're grasping the noise and tuning it to make it work for our ears. So we're doing the aesthetic implementation, but not the choreography, maybe. But I like this because it's not narrative. And I know I have friends that are phenomenal composers, and a lot of them are thinking in shapes and arcs, so that there is this very important temporal aspect, not only the timing and the knowing when a note should be, but also how this thing answers what I did 5 minutes ago. And they talk about this, about shapes and movement and transitions in a very, I see them talking with their hands a lot, almost in a sculptural way. They're sculpting with, I only think of it spatially. So this kind of sculpting with sound in space over time, which it's not kind of my thing, but I'm in awe of. But also I'm not that, I have found friends that are narrative filmmakers, and I really respect and love what they make, but I don't actually have that drive to make narrative things, which is, I think, why I love working in a generative fashion, because I love the juxtaposition of elements that generate meaning, knowing that, meaning doesn't mean anything, kind of in a Karen Barad sort of ontological way. And I like that playfulness, that it's just happening. I don't know whether that answered your question. Juan.
Yeah, hi. Nice to meet you, and thank you very much for your presentation. Very, very interesting. I liked what you mentioned about the this probabilistic Markov analysis of a grammatical structure. So whenever I think of a grammatical structure, I think of a formal system, and I think formal systems as speech or as language and music, they are usually like quite nuanced, and there's a lot of richness into that. So I was thinking, by seeing your matrix, it seems that like you have used a kind of a bidimensional analysis of your gestures, like up, down, and left, right. I was wondering if you thought of a kind of a more adding more dimensions into that, into a more sort of a layered type of analysis using the Markov chains, and also thinking of not just like a more richer causality for each of the gestures, not just the one order. Maybe you can just take like backtrack more of the gestures and create like a more, more complex analysis of the gestures. I was wondering if you're thinking, or if you're doing that in terms of going probably deeper in terms of the analysis. Yeah, so I have a few questions, but maybe I'll just stop there and yeah. Thank you.
No, thank you. Yeah, intriguing question. Honestly, I don't know what I'm going to do with this, because I looked at it and have been exploring and iterating a little bit on the software, maybe for a year and a half or more, coming back, looking at it fresh, and knowing that the first thing that I wanted to do was put speed into it, because when I draw and when I'm drawing in response to the system, some marks are slow and some marks are fast. Even just to have that dimensionality, the matrix would then be 4 times larger immediately, and giving that gestural intention as a description to say, quickly draw something left, make a slow circle, and then adding sizing to make a big arc or a small arc or a little square or a loose or a tight or an accurate, and add these adjectives on, and suddenly the complexity and the mathematical possibility grows exponentially. And I think I'd like to do that and maybe explore getting people to work with different things. I'd love to do this with paintbrushes or chalk markers, because the speed in which you move these things around really changes the mark that's made. But there's another side of it, which is whether I want to get involved in a long-term project of recreating me, kind of a la Aaron and other drawing systems, which become a sort of life's work of investigation of making an artist. And you know, I have very mixed feelings, and I think there's a big discussion about that, the idea of generating a drawing system or saying this is an artist, especially if you give a plastic rubber face and he gets arrested somewhere, which I think happened recently, which I probably that personalization of a drawing system and whether I want to become a life's work, I'm not sure. But I really was intrigued by this, exploring the relationship in systems. I don't know. What do you think?
I just have a follow-up question. Thank you for your response. Regarding to your matrix analysis, did you do it by hand, or do you have like a system that interprets your drawings in terms of numbers and store that as a matrix? Like, did you just hard-code it, like not hard-code it, but just write the matrix yourself?
Yeah, it was pretty crude. I just took loads of drawings. I went through all my sketchbooks and found a very small sample size, maybe 30 or 40 of these doodles that were all in a similar, where I'm just exploring shapes because I don't know what I want to draw. And started looking at, here's a category. I got 16 gestural marks. How often do they occur? And can I start to record the probability, basically doing a hidden Markov model? If you know do people know about hidden Markov models? I'm sure quite a lot of people do. But basically it's looking at the output of something and trying to guess what's the system generating it by doing statistical analysis of the notes that arrive or the words that appear. So trying to go, well, you know, I think this thing is happening X% of the time, and it's preceded by these things, but it's very rarely followed by those things, to be able to build my Markov model. But I did it just by observation of my own marks. And I thought through, you know, can I produce a training set of images to train something that I can reproduce in OpenCV, or I can run through Runway ML or use some other machine learning thing. But actually that wouldn't bring me the marks. It would only bring me the pixels. And I was interested in the marks and the gesture because it starts with this human intent and motion. And that's what I quite liked, that the system was giving you back instructions about motion that we interpret each individually with our own hand, but still centrally dictated. Gerhard, please.
Yes, thank you very much for sharing this work with us. My impression is that, I mean, from the beginning and also how you explained what you do and how you do it, I felt like, well, this is a very sort of basic way of sequencing things, right? I mean, it's a Markov chain with a depth of 1, so it doesn't really know very much about what has happened before. And while you were talking and while you were asking yourself, how could that be perceived by an audience, or how would that happen in a performance, I started to imagine, and probably not only me, but many here, that I would find it fascinating if I could see like 10 people drawing it at the same time. And I, as an observer, as an audience, I would just see how different they are doing what they're doing, how differently they respond to these instructions. I think that could be, for me, the most interesting aspect from what I can see at the moment. I don't know how you feel about that, or you see a possibility to sort of pull that off as a performative situation.
I think I absolutely agree. Technically, it's pretty crude. It's pretty basic. The system is not hugely sophisticated, but I realized quite quickly the system was taking me to this place that I was intrigued by. And I think for me, I'm not a performance artist. That's why I've ended up doing the kinds of things that I do. And I've done some sort of happenings and installation orientated, time specific things. But I like that it's inclusive, that to watch it, you have to experience it. And I think for me, sometimes, and I think this is a challenge with live generative work, is that it's difficult to know, is this pre-recorded? And I think it's sometimes difficult for an audience to appreciate, because sometimes the systems that we're engaged with and the ideas that we're engaged with that produce the work that they see is difficult for the audience to actually understand the depth of. And I've been to see shows and gone, I'm sure this is running off a hard drive as a video file. And if it's not, why does it matter? Because I know what's going on technically. And I can say, I can see the artifacts of Perlin noise and this and this and this and this. But a lot of it doesn't communicate to the audience, and they don't know whether it's been rendered out of After Effects or it's a live system. And I love seeing people that have no idea about generative art, especially when I've fed them food and given them a glass of wine and then said, now we're going to do this. They have no idea what's going on. And from a non-expert perspective, they get drawn into this moment of surprise where their drawing looks like other people's. I
was
know
imagining
how to square that.
Yeah, that in a live situation, suppose there were like 10 people on the stage with 10 video cameras from the top, and they are all projected behind them, and we hear the machine giving the instructions, and they all draw. I was imagining that kind of situation, and I, as an audience member, can see how different they are, if they are different. Basically, what you have said, that once we hold up our doodles, we can see that there are similarities. I mean, to experience that live in real time, I could find that quite exciting. That's what I meant.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I would like that.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to collaborate and do it, and I would be very happy to set that up.
Mm-hmm.
That would be great. And partly, as I say, because I'm not so much a performance-orientated artist, or my work is not so much, I would sort of want to, as everyone comes into the theater or the auditorium, give everyone a pencil and a piece of paper and not tell them what it's for until the system starts and everyone has to draw along. Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
The logistics of that is a separate thing, but I love the theater of having these sort of performers implementing the system.
Yeah, I mean, what sort of tickles my interest is the fact that I could see, or the audience could see this while it is happening. Now we were drawing, and then we were showing and then comparing. And I was just wondering if that is something that could happen sort of in real time. Because then you would also immediately understand what's it about, right? That they're all different. They get the same instructions. We hear the same instructions as them, but they do something different. So I think it would sort of sum up what you were trying also to share with us, or what you were performing with us as an experiment now in this meeting. So that's kind of the idea. I mean, it's just
I maybe I misunderstood your point earlier. I see that the gestures being revealed in parallel.
Yeah, I think that could be very nice. And maybe you, as you have said, maybe they use different materials or different brushes, or they're different people anyway. It's just some association I had with what you told us.
I like that. I really, really do like that. Well, I had intended to talk for much longer, as I say, but I realized that I've already done 8 hours on Zoom today. But also, one of the things I love is having discussion and sharing. And if we could actually be in the same room doing this, that would be fabulous. So I wanted to much more show a thing and hear what you're doing and what you were thinking. I don't know if anybody has any questions, or Gerhard's suggestion, fantastic. I'm going to maybe try that out, if I may, and see, because I don't know what that would look like to be able to watch other people, but that could be really intriguing to see the things being revealed. I don't know. I have we have an art week coming up that we're doing internally with a student organization within Code in Berlin. So perhaps I'll try and run a drawing event there.
One idea I would like to try out is actually what would happen if you have the same matrix, but you flip a few of the movements out, but still draw them. And whether you would still see a certain similarity or it would be recognizable or not. Like, so that there is still the same model, but changing it just a little bit. But I guess I could do that experiment myself if I have the code. I could just.
I was thinking, I'll go and code that now.
Yeah,
but that would be watching me coding, which would be.
But I think the power is indeed in the simplicity, because that makes it a lot easier to make simple experiments. I mean, if it were much smarter, then it's hard to actually to change it on a fundamental level. It gets more rigid, maybe also.
If you did want to go and twiddle with it, the code, I've put comments all the way through. The code is pretty straightforward. And the weighting for the matrix and the size of the matrix is picked up automatically from that one text file. So if you said, okay, well, this line is the scribbles, and I want to make it much more likely that it'll just make scribble after scribble after scribble after scribble, just go and change the weighting. And all you need to do is make sure that each line of probability of events
is one. Yeah. No, interesting. I think.
Yeah, if you're interested, I would love to collaborate on going somewhere new with this, or I'll fork the code and make some modifications. Would be really happy to collaborate or receive feedback or comments or go somewhere new as a sort of exploration.
Have you tried or have you thought of, like, for example, getting your drawings analyzed by, sort of translate them into digitalized images by using, I don't know, some sort of iPad? Then you can probably actually take the, sequence that, do the temporal analysis, because you would get, all of the temporal information also formalized.
Yeah. No, I hadn't thought about that. That's interesting, to be able to go straight into a vector and analyze.
Yeah, I mean, if you have, you could do your drawings on an iPad, let's say, or any kind of drawing tablet. But then you would have also the temporal information for each of the gestures. Because I don't know if you're considering the temporal information now, but then you would see that what comes after what, because you would have the timeline for each of them. And then you can go much deeper in terms of Markov chains. You can go up to level 3 or level 4 or whatever you want. And then you would have a much more, close to reality type of rationalization of your parameters. But yeah, I don't know. I was just thinking of that. And maybe you can get more, you can create a much more dynamic matrix, not just with gestures sort of structured in up, down, or in left, right, but you could have angles. And yeah, I mean, I guess by digitizing the graphics, the drawings, you can get any parameter. I mean, you can go as deep as you want, or as deep as you can handle.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I'd thought about adding in the speed of the gesture, but there's a temporality to the punctuation of certain kinds of marks the thinking about my own drawing and that my hand moves. And this is not, it's just that this is the source material that I had at the time, and I was intrigued by the source material, not necessarily suggesting that these are drawings of high aesthetic worth, but certain kinds of marks, this square, circle, squiggle, temporal punctuations where I'm flowing and then we'll stop and then move on and stop. So there is this periodicity or cyclic nature of different kinds of gestures. I hadn't thought about that. That's really intriguing. And if it were possible to draw with a tablet or with a pen and have that turn into vector rather than pixels, would be really intriguing.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there are so many dimensions that you can consider, like the length of the line, or the thickness, or whatever, as much as you can analyze, or as much as you can put into a database, or whatever you want to treat the data.
Yeah, no, my brain is going tick, 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 tick. There's another project that I produced, was hacking actually off somebody else's inspiration code to be able to do gestural style drawing that moves spatially. So as you draw with a mouse, you get different line thicknesses based upon speed that turn into three-dimensional objects that drift off with a temporality to it. That yeah, that's possibly what I'm doing over supper this evening, of hacking that code into something else.
Just well, it's not a question, but maybe just a comment that actually goes the other way around, as Juan, for example, proposed. I mean, I think there is a great value in this. I don't know, it's value the right word, but there is a great meaning in this very crude reduction. And I think that is. I think you should stay with that. It's my comment that goes in the other direction in some way. I think and this I see also in a lot of things that I do in my work. There is a very special situation that arises when you have two things that interact, and they interact not on the same scale, so to say. They don't use the same the spaces they use to interact with each other. They do not overlap completely, and there is some kind of distortion or some kind of there's condensation on one side and so to say enlarging on the other side. And this situation is, I think, very, very valuable if you manage to create it. And so I would like to say that this very crudely reducted thing that you have developed there is a great value in that, because it makes all these very sensible and tiny differences that arise from just listening to it very, very visible. And I think that's beautiful. It's not just what you said, that interaction or that rereading of that rules into some, I now use the Luke's word, contingent situation. That's really nice. And maybe, as Gerhard proposed, the way to go is more to make the differences more like to draw out, maybe, or make the space of differences visible that arise when anyone encounters with him or her differences this same situation.
Yeah, and absolutely. And for me, I as I make more work and I get older and I see more of the things that I've made over the years, I start to recognize what my marks look like and have more confidence in making those marks. And I like the crudity of it. It's one of the things that I like working with machines. I like the dirtiness and I like the angular noise. I like machine noise. And I have friends that want to make beautiful, aesthetically decorative. And that's not, it's something that I really appreciate. But it's not actually what I want to make. And I quite like stuff being dirty partly I'm an aging 80s art punk, and I love that early noise and looking back and going, can I do a 4-bit GIF compression? And it's just made out of 4 dots and it's rough as hell. And it really explicitly is machine. I actually do quite like that. And I like the crudity of it. And I like that it completely avoids any question of uncanny valley, which that's a separate thing. But the exploration of it, I think Gerhard's got a really good point about how to communicate it. It's worked best when I've had groups of people around, but it's a complicated thing to share because I don't think it works and communicates very well. What I find interesting about it, one-to-one, but in a group, it seems to work.
No, what I really like about your project is that you turn us into plotters, right?
Yes, that's what I find really funny.
So that I think I can take that away. That's
yeah. No, that was what intrigued me. Is actually so much of the relationship of what we do is we're having machines implementing what we want, and we're very, very much in control of that. And I love that the machine is not having any truck with what we want. It doesn't really care, but it just wants us to implement its wishes, which I quite like the perversity of it. And I think that's the thing that intrigued me, as well as all these kind of other aesthetic and commonality and interpretation. But the machine is just not interested in what we care about. So I think actually I will, yeah. Ludwig.
Yeah, I mean, crudity has this sort of balance to it also. So, I mean, crudity could also be pointed to as a sort of conceptual clarity. And I think that one very interesting sort of incarnation of this work would be to give someone pen and paper and then just keep telling them to draw up, you know. Like that's the most distilled version of finding out what's really going on here, because then you're really pushing straight into this Lamont Young like sort of going to the edge and then seeing what actually exists in the space that is left between the instruction and the interpretation. So I'm also I'm team crude. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, I do like the crudity of it, and I feel comfortable with that it's doing the thing that I needed to do. The visual elements of it with what I could do at the time. It was like, I have X hours in my studio left. I want to make them. What can I do now? And the visual aspect and the speech, I don't like. It's a little crude, and I either want to make it cruder or make it more elegant, one or the other. But I'm intrigued by the really messing with people's heads aspect. I think it was Lawrence Rena who was talking about making art, and it's a fantastic interview and quote. I saw him, and he was saying, you know, I'm making conceptual art, but I don't want to put a piece of work up by the side of the road and you drive home and, you know, you read it and it messes with your head and it fucks up your day. If you excuse, we can bleep this out. And he said, no, I want to make work where you drive home and you look at it and it fucks up your whole life. And I thought that was the most wonderful sentiment about conceptual art, to really do this perspectual shift of challenging people. But I don't, maybe that's a different system, because we then have to design the system to draw people in and properly mess with them. But I think it surprised me. The first drawing out, I started panicking a little bit because I want this all to go really well. And the drawing system is saying, draw left and draw left. And it did it 4 times in a row. And I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be awful. It's going to be one of those random elements, because randomness is lumpy and streaky, where it just says draw left 37 times in a row, which from a
I also very much enjoy the ambiguity of the, I mean, this sort of directioned arches leaves the kind of ambiguity for the interpreter that I thought was very interesting. So maybe crudeness could also bloom out into, I don't know, obscurity somehow. Or maybe you can give directions that are ambiguous or perhaps impossible even.
I've got friends that do this in a sort of performance sense, especially where they're doing things like audio walks, and they will offer almost fluxus or situationist type explorations. And in a way, this is a little bit of that Guy Debord situationist derive, go to the nearest bar and drink 3 shots of whiskey, then follow a person in a hat for 5 minutes, then turn left. That forced exploration of the city. And I enjoy that, but some of it I find a little, from the things I'm interested in, a little forced. But I've got friends that find that absolutely where they live and really intriguing. And I've seen some fantastic work in that kind of style. But if you have some ideas how to properly mess with people's heads, I'm very intrigued to hear. I would love to collaborate on that.
In one sense, already the term a squiggle is already, in one sense, mind-blowing, right?
Yes. Yeah, and also I'm quite aware. I'm now, my studio is based in the Netherlands, and now I'm starting to work out of. Today I'm in Berlin. That I'm going between different languages, multiple languages. So on a weekly basis, I'm doing English, bad English, some French, some Flemish, some Dutch, some German, and Danish, and often all mashed together. And this ambiguity of meaning and language I really like, that in so many different languages, tiny little kind of non-words like squiggle have this gestural or cultural or kind of proprioceptic body meaning, and they all differ slightly, which I love.
I also thought that when you used the word doodle for the first time while you were describing your work today, I thought that's something that could have come much earlier, describing it as a doodle, right? I mean, there we have, it suddenly, in retrospect, it makes much more sense to me to describe this as doodling, or than the machine sort of telling us to doodle or how to doodle. Or don't you? Are these not doodles you're doing in your notebooks? Or?
The things that I was thinking of, I don't know. I guess they are, in the grand scheme of things, they're doodles. But often I feel like a doodle is something that I would do while I'm doing something else. I'm in a meeting or I'm on a telephone, and I'm writing down a list of things. Then I'm kind of decorating it, or I'm doing shapes around it. And this specifically came from me doing pages of drawings that with I'm performing a drawing with no intention to it.
Right, so they were not doodles really in that sense. Yeah, no, I get it.
Possibly they were, but somehow in this particular set of doing things was, I think the reason that I talk about, I think it's Louise Bourgeois and the Annie Vera Molnar work, where they're both simulating writing, and it looks like writing, but it isn't. And they're performing writing, getting ready to do something else. And I realized that struck a chord with what I felt that I was doing, where I'm sat somewhere and I want to draw, but I don't know what I want to draw. So I'll just draw gestures that fill a space, and then maybe my mind will clear and I'll draw something or record something or work out what that diagram is that I'm trying to record. But yeah, maybe they're doodles.
Mm. The other thing that you mentioned is that you like the sound. So this is also something that could be very suggestive in a performative situation. If you have those people who are drawing or following these instructions, have them sort of mic'd up and have those gestures also made audible.
Yeah, to get some piezo contact mics or something like that could be could be really interesting.
And yet the other thing I thought before is that this, since you're using voice commands, so you're using sound actually in order to instruct us, one could also sort of follow that line, that those instructions become less command-like, but their gesture also induces certain, I mean, you said maybe the speed could be something, but maybe the way things are uttered, which of course is very difficult with a computer, so then maybe one would need another solution. But that kind of that idea, that I also know some musicians who work like that, that the score is basically a sound that the musicians have to copy or to simulate, or to, so that there could be a connection between the gesture in the instruction and the gesture on the paper. But I mean, this is really sort of thinking way further than what you have, I think what you have talked about, but it just triggers those ideas in my mind.
Yeah, I think I talked with Luke and David, and was really keen to be involved in this discussion within what they were proposing with ARIGA. And we talked a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, okay, so what am I going to talk about? And there's lots and lots of different areas of the things that I work within. And I keep coming back to this as a piece that I really like, because the code is not the important bit, and how it looks is not the important bit, but the system is not the important bit. And I think out of all of it, for me, it was that, as you put it, we're becoming plotters. And that was what I found really funny, this twisting of the relationship at the end of it. And I don't know quite where that goes, but for me, I think it maybe is something that I might come back to. But I'm not sure how to keep going there, because there's such a strong performance element to it.
Maybe you could ask your performers also to produce plotting sounds where they're actually plotting.
Oh, my mind has just gone sideways to huge scaffolding rigs with electric motors on, and the people hanging underneath holding paintbrushes as they get spun around on stage. Wow, make huge plotters with people inside. Oh no, my mind has just gone. So my mind's gone somewhere else. I'm getting tiny plotters, but with mice dipped in ink attached to them, which is the other scale thing. But both of these have really big health and safety and ethical implications.
I think there is an artist that does that already. I think I have seen a performance at Ars Electronica of one artist hanging into a robot arm and being drawn, put onto a wall, and drawing basically like this. So
yeah, there was. This is a little tangential, but some of you may know his work. It's a experimental musician, performance artist called Marco Donnarumma, and I met him some years ago at Stijn in Netherlands, and he was producing material. And I saw one of his recent performances, when actually it's a few years ago now, when we could go to performances at Transmediale, and he developed this. A lot of contact mics, experimental systems that respond to his movement, and he'd built himself a robot that's attached to his back, and it's this robot arm that, deafeningly loud, and it's like taking Stellark's ideas of performance for third arm way forward, and he has this robot arm appendage that essentially in the performance beats him to death on stage, and that's it, the robot wins, which I thought was just wonderful and beautiful and hugely depressing. And on that cheerful note, I want to say, Luke, David, thank you very much for making the beginning of ARIGA happen. And thank you so much for everyone for coming in, and from Sridhar, multiple time zones, people all over the place. And thank you for generous questions, and for allowing me to show you some of the things that I've been working on.
Thank you, Dan. And
Thank you.
we'll keep in touch through Slack and email and Zoom.
As I said, if anybody is interested, the source code is online. It's pretty straightforward. If anybody wants to fork it or mess with it, or would be interested in staging it or collaborating, I would be really interested. And please do send me updates of what you're working on. I'm always really, really interested to find out where people are taking their ideas and performances and work next. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Sorry, I was late. I was teaching. Lecture finished late, but it's nice to see you all. Take care now.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Hussein.